All right, so here's something that came on my news feed today. This is really unbelievable. The Hollywood Chamber of Commerce has actually decided to give a star on the Walk of Fame. You know, when you go down to Hollywood Boulevard, they have all the stars with, the different celebrities' names on them. They actually gave a star to the Chevy Suburban, saying it's like the most iconic vehicle in Hollywood history, which is absolutely insane. I understand that Chevy marketing department did give money to have this privilege or to do this, which I'm sure it was a lot of money. But I mean, when you think of vehicles in movies going back all these years, there's far more iconic vehicles in movies. When I see a Chevy Suburban, I don't say, "Oh, that's a Chevy Suburban. That reminds me of that movie." It doesn't remind me of any movie. It reminds me of Biggie Smalls getting shot. That's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of some baller taking an Uber Black to the airport. That's what I think of when I think of the Chevy Suburban. And in fact, when you think of the Chevy lineup, there's like far more iconic vehicles in Chevy's lineup from movies. I mean, you got the 55 Chevy that was used in Two-Lane Blacktop as well as American Graffiti. You've got Corvettes. I mean, that was in Corvette Summer, of course. It was also in other movies, such as California Dreamin', played prominently in that movie. There was a Corvette in the TV show The A-Team, the TV show Route 66. So, I mean, that's a way more iconic, even in a Chevy brand for movies and TV shows than the Suburban. It's hard for them to say that, because there's so many car guys in Hollywood. I grew up here in Los Angeles. I live in Pasadena, which is basically Los Angeles. And so what I decided to do, I made a list of 10 vehicles that I feel that, like, generally when you see that vehicle, either when you see that vehicle, you associate it with a certain movie, or, it's just one of those vehicles that really define an era of film, or something that really like played prominently in the film industry. And I think you'll agree with this list. So tell me what you think of this list. I'm sure there's others I've left off. I made 10 because 10 is a good round number. And let me know in the comments what you think of this list. I mean, this list is definitely more prominent, more famous than anything related to the Chevy Suburban. All right, so this list is in any sort of order. It's not a top 10 list, like one down to nothing. It's just a list of 10 cars that I feel are very iconic in no sort of order. The first is a big one. This is the DeLorean. Now, when you say DeLorean, Back to the Future, right? Just like anyone who owns a DeLorean. I've never owned a DeLorean, but I know people who own DeLoreans. Anybody who owns a DeLorean, all you get are comments about the Back to the Future movie. You get movie quotes and things like that. In fact, a lot of owners of DeLoreans bought them to do time machine replicas out of. It's just, realistically, I think DeLorean is so tied to the Back to the Future movie series that it's inseparable. So definitely way more iconic. Obviously, DeLorean's been out of business, for various reasons. You can watch all the documentaries and biopics you want on that. But way more iconic vehicle for movies. The second one I have listed here, this is a biggie. Now this one might be for more older people. Say younger people aren't gonna know this as much. The 1970 Dodge Challenger from the movie Vanishing Point, which movie came out in 1971. That movie came out before I was born, and it's iconic. When you see a white 1970 Dodge Challenger, your mind automatically says Vanishing Point, as long as you know the movie, that is. But iconic car, iconic movie. They did do a couple remakes that they used a Dodge Challenger in, so maybe even younger people might get that one. Okay, next on the list, we have the 1958 Plymouth Fury. Now, immediately in your bound, you just popped up Christine, right? Because, that movie, it was basically the big bad villain in the movie was the 1958 Plymouth Fury, known as Christine in the movie Christine. So the title of the movie is basically the car. Literally everyone I know who owns a 57 or 58 Plymouth, you take the car out and people say, "Oh wow, it's Christine." No matter even what color it is, even if it doesn't even have to be red. This is the 58 Plymouth Fury never came in red. Now, all these years later, the majority of them are painted red because of the movie. That's how tied this car is to the movie, similar to the DeLorean. Next on the list is one of the most popular cars of all time. There's actually two cars on this list that are of the most popular cars of all time. This one being the Ford Model T. Now, they built a lot of these, but when you go back and you watch old movies, like the old Hal Roach comedies of like the 1920s, 1930s, and whatnot, your Laurel and Hardy movies and things like that. The Ford Model T was like the butt of so many jokes in these movies. They destroyed these cars. They had these cars like literally falling apart in these movies because it was such a big part of society at the time. And when you think of movie history and car history, you're going back to the early days of both. The early days of the automotive industry and the early days of the film industry. And these were the first cars like featured prominently on camera. So that's why I think the Ford Model T, honestly, it's probably the most iconic car used in movies because the history of this car being featured prominently goes all the way back to the beginning, essentially, of the industry almost. Next one is another Ford. This one's from one movie. I mean, I'm sure you can guess what it is. When I say a Ford Mustang that's been in one movie that is extremely well known, of course, I'm talking about Steve McQueen in Bullitt, driving the I believe it's a '68 Mustang Fastback that's painted green. There's the iconic Dodge Charger chase in that movie. Like literally everyone who owned a VH copy of this movie kept it queued up to the car chase scene and just watched the car chase scene over and over and over again. Most iconic car chase in movie history. Ford has actually gone back and made several Bullitt Edition Mustangs over the years. Recently, the original car was rediscovered, one of the original star car from the movie, and I think it's going to be sold at Barrett-Jackson or one of those like big auctions here coming up in a few months. Bullitt Mustang, big iconic movie car. I mean, how could you even deny that? Next one on the list. This is another one. I think earlier I mentioned the 55 Chevy from American Graffiti. Now we're going to go back to the Milner Coupe, the Milner Ford Coupe from American Graffiti. Now I realize this car, I think it was like cut up or something. It was wound up at Universal Studios in Florida, and it was almost destroyed. One of those cars you see, you see a 32 Ford Coupe, like that. You think of the movie American Graffiti. There's a lot of cars in that movie that are like that. There's even like a '58 Impala in that movie. You think of that movie, but I think the Milner Coupe is probably the most iconic, car of that movie. Next one, and this is a big one. Here's a company that is no longer manufactured. Well, the company's still in business. They don't manufacture that marque anymore. This is the '77 Trans Am, the Pontiac Trans Am. Of course, I'm talking about Smokey and the Bandit. I'm talking about Burt Reynolds here. Big time. When you see a late '70s Trans Am, especially if it's black, you think of Smokey and the Bandit. You think of it. That's exactly what you think of when you think of that. And then continuing with the Pontiac Trans Am, so I'm kind of splitting this into two. When you think of a third generation Trans Am, an '80s Trans Am, especially if it's black, you think of the TV show Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff. You think of KITT. Now, a lot of people even made KITT replicas. They're still making KITT replicas up until today with the light on the front and everything like that. So definitely the Pontiac Trans Am, whether it be the second generation F-body or the third generation F-body, definitely an icon in movies history. Like something that when you see that car, you think of that either movie or TV show. Next one on the list. This one goes back. I remember watching this movie when I was a kid, and I fell in love with this movie, and I'd always wanted one of these cars. And it's also, I think it's the number one selling car of all time. This is of course the Volkswagen Beetle, Herbie, the Love Bug. These movies stretch, going way back to the 1960s. They made them up until the Lindsay Lohan Herbie Fully Loaded movie. A lot of people, when you think of a Volkswagen Beetle, especially a '66 and earlier one, you automatically think of the Love Bug series of movies. You think of Herbie. So that's a huge iconic car that was, and it was used, I'm sure, in a lot of other movies. It was even in American Graffiti. But the one everyone thinks of is the Love Bug. Next car on my list is another Mopar. This one's the Dodge Charger. Now, when you go to Dodge Charger, when you think, okay, first of all, we talked about Bullitt, where the Dodge Charger was chasing the Mustang and Steve McQueen's Mustang in that movie. But probably the biggest thing you think of when you see a Dodge Charger, you think of the Dukes of Hazzard television show. This was on when I was a kid. It was iconic. You just, no matter what color, when you see a Dodge Charger, especially if it's orange, you think of the Dukes of Hazzard. Now, going up to like more current generation, when you see a Dodge Charger, a lot of times you think of the Fast and the Furious movies, which also featured a Dodge Charger. So Dodge Charger, way more iconic than Chevy Suburban. And the last one on the list, this one's kind of biased, since I own two of these cars, which if you've watched my other videos, you already know what I'm talking about. The AMC Pacer. You're thinking, oh, geez. But I have owned my Pacer 2.5 years. It's a wagon, not a coupe. It's red with wood paneling. And I still, when I take it out, I get people yelling, it's Wayne's World. I get people asking if I listen to Bohemian Rhapsody at full volume while I bang my head while driving this thing. It is like associated with the movie Wayne's World. I realize the movie Wayne's World isn't like critically acclaimed. Yeah, they made 2 of them, but still. I think it's more iconic when it pertains to movies than the Chevy Suburban. So that's the end of my list. Let me know what you think of it. Let me know what you think of the Chevy Suburban getting a star on the Walk of Fame. As being labeled the most iconic car in movie history, whether you think it's like a slap on the face to like car guys or how you feel about it. If you like my channel, be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like this video and just let me know what you think. All right, thank you.